The emergency room doors swung open at 11:47 p.m. on a cold November night, and what the nurses saw made their blood run cold. 73-year-old Robert Mitchell, a decorated Vietnam War veteran and beloved high school history teacher for over 4 decades, was wheeled in on a stretcher. His face was swollen beyond recognition. 3 broken ribs. A fractured cheekbone. Internal bleeding. The kind of injuries that could kill a man his age. "What happened?" the head nurse demanded. "Assault," the paramedic said grimly. "Parking lot of Henderson's diner. Witnesses say it was unprovoked." The attack had occurred in broad daylight, in front of at least a dozen people. Mr. Mitchell had been leaving the diner after his usual Tuesday lunch when a black Mercedes SUV nearly ran him over in the parking lot. When the elderly veteran tapped on the window to remind the driver to be more careful, the driver exploded. 24-year-old Chase Donovan stepped out of that vehicle like a man who owned the world. Expensive suit. Designer sunglasses. An attitude that screamed entitlement. "Do you know who my father is?" he'd shouted at the old man. Before Mr. Mitchell could respond, Chase shoved him hard against a parked car. When the veteran tried to steady himself, Chase punched him in the face. Then again. And again. The elderly man crumpled to the asphalt, and still Chase didn't stop. "Someone call the police," a woman screamed. "I am the police." Chase had laughed. "My father runs this whole damn town." 3 witnesses had to physically pull him away. By then, Mr. Mitchell was unconscious, bleeding on the pavement. Within hours, the story exploded. Henderson, a tight-knit community of 40,000, was in an uproar. Mr. Mitchell wasn't just any citizen. He was a pillar of the community. He'd taught 3 generations of children. He volunteered at the VFW Hall. He organized the annual Memorial Day Parade. The local newspaper ran the headline, "War Hero Brutally Beaten by Privileged Youth." Social media erupted. Vigils were organized outside the hospital. Parents who'd been his students decades ago stood on the courthouse steps demanding justice. The mayor issued a statement. The police chief, Chase's own father, Thomas Donovan, was forced to recuse himself from the investigation. The state police took over the case. Chase Donovan was arrested within 24 hours. Aggravated assault. Battery of an elderly person. Resisting arrest, because even when officers came for him, he'd smirked and said, "My dad will have your badges." The bail hearing was brief. Despite his lawyer's protests, Chase was remanded to custody. The evidence was overwhelming. Video from the diner's security camera. A dozen eyewitnesses. Mr. Mitchell's broken body. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. Henderson had never been this angry, this unified, this hungry for justice. But an unexpected revelation was about to change everything in the courtroom. The Henderson County Courthouse had never been so packed. Every seat was filled. People lined the walls. News cameras crowded outside, barred from filming inside but ready to capture every word from those who emerged. At the bench sat Judge Margaret Hartwell, a 68-year-old veteran of the judicial system with a reputation for fairness, intelligence, and zero tolerance for nonsense. She'd served in the Marine Corps before law school, prosecuted cases for 15 years, and spent the last 2 decades as a judge. Her silver hair was pulled back severely. Her eyes missed nothing. The prosecution table was manned by Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen, a meticulous attorney known for her thorough preparation. And then there was the defense table. Chase Donovan entered the courtroom like he was walking into a country club. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored. His hair was styled with precision. And on his face was a smile, not nervous, not remorseful, but amused. His attorney, Gerald Blackstone, one of the most expensive defense lawyers in the state, walked beside him with an air of confidence. Chase's eyes swept the courtroom with barely concealed contempt. When he saw the crowd, he actually chuckled. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. Judge Hartwell entered, her expression unreadable. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "We are here today for the trial of Chase Michael Donovan, who stands accused of aggravated assault, battery of an elderly person, and related charges. Mr. Donovan, do you understand the charges against you?" Chase leaned back in his chair. "I understand them, Your Honor. I also understand they're exaggerated." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Hartwell's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Donovan, you will speak only when asked a direct question, and you will address this court with respect." "Is that clear?" "Crystal," Chase said with a smirk. Blackstone put a hand on his client's arm, but Chase shrugged it off. The prosecution presented its case methodically. The security footage was damning. Clear video of Chase throwing the first punch, then continuing the assault even as Mr. Mitchell fell. The testimony from witnesses was consistent and powerful. Then came Mr. Mitchell himself. The elderly veteran walked slowly to the witness stand, aided by a cane he hadn't needed before the attack. His face still bore fading bruises. His movements were careful, pained. "Mr. Mitchell," ADHN said gently, "can you tell the court what happened that day?" Robert Mitchell took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. "I'd just finished lunch. I was walking to my car when this SUV came speeding through the lot. Nearly hit me. I knocked on the window, politely, just to let the driver know he should slow down. For the children, you know, kids run through that parking lot." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "The young man got out. Started yelling at me. Using language I won't repeat in this courtroom. I tried to apologize if I'd offended him, but then, he pushed me. I'm an old man, Your Honor. I couldn't defend myself. He kept hitting me. I remember thinking about my wife, about my students. I remember the pavement. And then, nothing until I woke up in the hospital." The courtroom was silent. Several people were crying. "And do you see the person who attacked you in this courtroom?" Chen asked. "Yes, ma'am. That's him right there." Mr. Mitchell pointed at Chase. Chase rolled his eyes. Judge Hartwell saw it. "Mr. Donovan, do you find something amusing about this testimony?" Chase shrugged. "Your Honor, I barely touched him. He's old. He probably fell because he's unsteady. I mean, look at him. Should someone that fragile even be driving?" The courtroom erupted. "Order!" Judge Hartwell's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order in this court." Mr. Blackstone grabbed his client's arm. Chase stopped talking. But Chase was on a roll. "My father has given 30 years to this community. I've grown up with privilege, yes, but that's because my family earned it. This old man got in my way, and now everyone wants to crucify me because—" "Mr. Donovan," Judge Hartwell's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You will be silent, or I will hold you in contempt." Chase leaned forward, his eyes locked on the judge. "You know, maybe if this town showed more respect to people like my family, situations like this wouldn't." "That is enough." The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom. Her face was stern, controlled fury barely contained. "You stand accused of beating a 73-year-old war veteran nearly to death, and you dare to lecture this court about respect?" For the first time, Chase's confidence wavered. Just slightly. Judge Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. Then her eyes moved to scan the courtroom. They settled on something. Someone in the back. "I think," she said slowly, "that this court needs to hear from someone else before we proceed further." The room fell completely silent. And then someone stood up in the back of the courtroom. The man who rose from the back row had been sitting there the entire time, unnoticed in the crowd. He wore a simple suit, No uniform, though everyone in town knew him by his title. Police Chief Thomas Donovan. He was a large man, 56 years old, with graying hair cut military short. For 32 years he'd served Henderson, first as a patrol officer, then detective, and for the last decade as chief of police. He was respected, feared by criminals, trusted by citizens. And in that moment, he looked absolutely devastated. "Chief Donovan," Judge Hartwell said, "please come forward." The courtroom was frozen. Chase's head whipped around, and for the first time, real fear flashed across his face. "Dad," he said. "Dad, what are you?" "Be quiet, son," Thomas said. His voice was rough with emotion. He walked down the aisle slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent courtroom. When he reached the front, he didn't sit. He stood facing the judge, his hands clasped in front of him. "Your Honor," he began, "I recused myself from this case officially, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see this, to witness what my son has become." "Dad, don't," Chase started. "I said be quiet," Thomas roared, and his son flinched. The chief had never, in Chase's entire life, raised his voice to him like that. Thomas turned back to Judge Hartwell. His eyes were wet. "Your Honor, I've failed. As a father, as a man, as an officer of the law. I gave my son everything, the best schools, every opportunity, every advantage. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to teach him the most important things. Humility, respect, accountability." He took a shaky breath. "I know what people think. That I've protected him. That I've pulled strings, made his problems disappear. And God help me, they're right. When he got his third speeding ticket, I made it go away. When he got into a bar fight 2 years ago, I convinced the victim not to press charges. I told myself I was protecting my son. But I wasn't. I was protecting myself from the shame of admitting I'd raised a man who thinks he's above the law I've spent my life upholding." Chase was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face now. "Dad, please." Thomas finally looked at his son. The love in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was the pain. "I love you, Chase. You're my boy, my only child. But what you did to Mr. Mitchell..." His voice broke. "That man taught you in 10th grade. He stayed late to help you pass history when you were failing. He wrote you a letter of recommendation for college. And you beat him nearly to death because he dared to suggest you slow down." The chief turned back to Judge Hartwell, standing at attention like the Marine he'd once been. "Your Honor, I'm here to tell this court that I will not be using my position, my reputation, or my resources to help my son avoid the consequences of his actions. I'm here to ask, to beg, that you apply the full weight of the law. Not because I don't love my son, but because I do. Because the man I see at that defense table is not the man I wanted to raise. And if there's any chance of saving him, of him becoming someone worthy of the last name he carries, it will only happen if he faces real justice, real consequences." The courtroom was utterly silent. Several people were openly weeping. Chase had collapsed forward, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Thomas walked to the defense table. He put his hand on his son's shoulder. "I love you," he whispered. "But I will not save you from this. You need to save yourself." Then he walked back up the aisle and out of the courtroom, his back straight but his heart clearly shattered. Judge Hartwell sat for a long moment, her eyes closed. When she opened them, they were hard as diamonds. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "stand up." Chase stood on shaking legs, his arrogance completely gone. "This court will take a 15-minute recess, and then I will deliver my verdict and sentence. Use that time to think very carefully about the man you want to be." The gavel fell. 15 minutes later, The courtroom reconvened. Chase Donovan stood before Judge Hartwell, his expensive suit somehow looking shabby now, his face pale and tear-streaked. His lawyer stood beside him, silent. Judge Hartwell looked at the young man for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Donovan, I've been on this bench for 20 years. I've seen every kind of criminal, from those driven by desperation to those driven by greed to those who simply don't care about anyone but themselves. You fell into that last category when you walked into my courtroom." Past tense. She leaned forward. "What I saw today was a young man so consumed by entitlement, so divorced from basic human decency, that he could justify beating an elderly veteran and then mock him in court. But I also saw something else. I saw a father willing to sacrifice his own comfort, his own reputation, to try to save his son's soul. And I saw, perhaps for the first time in your life, Mr. Donovan, a glimpse of understanding in your eyes." She opened the file before her. "The jury has found you guilty on all counts. Given the severity of the assault, the vulnerability of the victim, and your complete lack of remorse until today, I could sentence you to 10 years in state prison. And part of me wants to do exactly that." Chase's legs nearly gave out. "However," Judge Hartwell continued, "I believe in justice, not merely punishment. And true justice requires not just consequences, but the possibility of redemption." She looked at Mr. Mitchell, who sat in the front row. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to address the court?" The elderly veteran stood slowly. He walked to the front and turned to face Chase. "Young man," he said quietly, "you nearly killed me. You took away my sense of safety. You caused my wife to cry herself to sleep for weeks. You made my former students, including you, wonder if I was a fool for believing the best in people." Chase looked at the floor. "But I'm a teacher," Mr. Mitchell continued, "and I still believe people can learn, can change, can become better. Your father is a good man, one of the finest I've known. Which means there's hope for you, too. I don't want to see you destroyed. I want to see you grow up." He paused. "I want you to understand what you took from me, and to spend your life making sure no one else suffers the way I did. That would honor the sacrifice of the young Marines I served with in Vietnam, boys who died so that people like you could have the freedom to become better than you are today." He looked at Judge Hartwell. "I trust your judgment, your honor." Then he returned to his seat, and the courtroom erupted in applause until the judge's gavel restored order. Judge Hartwell nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Your grace humbles this court." She turned back to Chase. "Chase Michael Donovan, I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years contingent upon exemplary behavior. However, if you demonstrate genuine rehabilitation, I will consider alternative sentencing after 18 months. She held up a hand as the murmurs began. "Additionally, you will pay all of Mr. Mitchell's medical expenses. You will complete 2,000 hours of community service upon release, working specifically with elderly veterans. You will attend anger management and therapy throughout your incarceration. And you will write a personal letter of apology to Mr. Mitchell, not for this court, but for him if he chooses to read it." The gavel came down. "But there's one more thing," a voice said. Thomas Donovan had re-entered the courtroom. He walked forward again, standing beside his son. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to add a personal consequence." Judge Hartwell nodded. Thomas looked at Chase. "When you get out, you won't have access to your trust fund. You won't have a car waiting for you. You won't move back into my house unless you earn it. You'll get a job, a real job, working with your hands like I did when I was your age. You'll pay your own rent. You'll learn what it means to earn respect instead of expecting it." His voice softened. "And if you do all that, if you truly become the man I always hoped you'd be, then you'll have your father back. Not the father who enabled you, but the father who believes in you." the father who will stand beside you as you build a life worth living. He put his hand on Chase's shoulder. I love you, son. Now show me you love yourself enough to do better. Chase turned to his father and, for the first time since he was a child, broke down completely. Thomas held him as he sobbed. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. I swear I will. I know you will, Thomas whispered. I believe in you. Judge Hartwell let the moment breathe before striking her gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. Bailiff, take Mr. Donovan into custody. Epilogue. 18 months later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Henderson VFW Hall as volunteers prepared for the annual Veterans Day breakfast. Among them was a young man in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair shorter than it had been, his face leaner and etched with something that hadn't been there before, humility. Chase Donovan carried chairs from the storage room, setting them up with careful attention. When Mr. Mitchell entered, using only a slight cane now, Chase immediately set down the chair and walked over. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Can I help you with anything? The elderly veteran studied him for a moment, then smiled. You can help me set up these tables, young man. And while we work, you can tell me about the book you're reading. Your father mentioned you've been studying philosophy in prison. Stoicism, mostly, Chase said, falling into step beside him. Marcus Aurelius. Epictetus. A lot about discipline and virtue and understanding what we can and can't control. Good men to learn from, Mr. Mitchell said. They understood that true strength isn't in power over others, but in power over yourself. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Other volunteers, many of them former students of Mr. Mitchell, watched with cautious approval. Chase had been volunteering here every weekend since his early release 3 months ago, granted by Judge Hartwell after reviewing reports of his transformation in prison. He worked in construction during the week, starting at 6 a.m. and finishing exhausted at 6 p.m. He rented a tiny apartment on the south side. He attended therapy twice a week and anger management classes on Thursdays. He'd written Mr. Mitchell that letter, 12 pages of genuine apology and reflection, and had been shocked when the veteran wrote back, offering forgiveness and mentorship. His father visited every Sunday. They didn't talk about the past much. Instead, they built a new relationship, one conversation at a time, based on earned respect rather than assumed entitlement. As the veterans began arriving for breakfast, Chase helped them to their seats, listened to their stories, and served their meals with quiet attentiveness. One elderly Marine, seeing Chase help a man in a wheelchair, leaned over to Thomas Donovan. "That your boy?" Thomas nodded, watching his son with pride and relief. "You raised him right," the Marine said. Thomas shook his head gently. "No, I raised him wrong the first time. But he's raising himself right now. And that's what matters." Across the room, Chase was laughing at something Mr. Mitchell said, his face open and genuine in a way it had never been before the courtroom, before the fall, before the long climb back to humanity. Judge Hartwell, who had stopped by in civilian clothes to honor the veterans, watched from the doorway. She caught Thomas's eye and nodded once, a silent acknowledgment that justice had worked the way it was supposed to. Not perfectly, not easily, but truly. Because real justice isn't just about punishment. It's about the possibility that even the most broken among us can be rebuilt, that even the most arrogant can learn humility, that even the most privileged can discover the value of earning their place in the world, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to save someone from the consequences that might finally save them from themselves. As Chase Donovan helped an 89-year-old Navy veteran to his seat and listened with genuine interest to a story about Normandy Beach, Thomas Donovan felt something he hadn't felt in years when looking at his son. Hope. Reflection. In a world that often confuses privilege with worth and power with respect, this story reminds us of fundamental truths. True strength lies not in dominance but in accountability. Real love sometimes means allowing those we care for to face the consequences of their choices. Justice without the possibility of redemption is merely revenge, but redemption without justice is merely denial. Respect cannot be inherited or purchased. It must be earned through action, humility, and service. Mr. Mitchell's grace, Judge Hartwell's wisdom, and Chief Donovan's courage combine to create what the legal system aims for but rarely achieves. Not just punishment, but transformation. Chase Donovan lost everything: his freedom, his arrogance, his easy life. But in losing those things, he found something more valuable: his character, his purpose, and his humanity. In the end, the courtroom that day witnessed more than a trial. It witnessed a young man's death and rebirth. The death of entitlement and the birth of earned dignity. And isn't that what justice, at its best, should always strive to achieve?